Welcome, everyone. This is a much anticipated forum here at the summit. Some of you may be here for the first time. Show of hands, first timers. This is kind of awesome. One of the things that you need to know is that this is a breakfast forum. Let me speak to breakfast for a moment, and that is to say that the little sheets that have the breakfast entrees on your table are there for a purpose, and so if you can note them and fill them out, that's kind of good, more than kind of good. The other thing to note is that here at the summit, the buck kind of stops here with the summit, namely that we will have a count of everyone who's here, whether you've eaten or not. I don't know the mathematics on all this, but we want to make sure that people who are here order a breakfast. And for that, we need to make sure of staffing the component here. Dear Kathy is our waitress, and we hope there's some, yeah, give it up for Kathy. There we go, there we go, there we go. And then, even as I speak, I see that at least one of our additional speakers is arriving, she being Professor Vanessa Merton. Vanessa, follow the sound of my voice. Right this way, please, here at the table. I feel like Mater D and Shepard and more, because we have a very abbreviated time frame for us. For you first-timers, know that this we end promptly at 9 o'clock. And I'm going to be channeling my inner Elaine Chapnick and make sure that we end at 8:58. Mark my words. Along the way of our panel, I want to say that the topic is before us. It is entitled, indeed, Immigration Now, the Law, the Local Impact, and Local Response. We have a small window, as I mentioned just a moment ago, for this topic. Dr. Burton, welcome to you. Okay, this is a grand entrance. Is there coffee? Do we have coffee? By all means. And let's make sure it's there. If you turn your cup over, and this is a cue for everybody, it gets filled. It's kind of a special thing here at the Nautilus, so don't hesitate to do that. We will have, and we block, pardon me, don't forget the $8, I'm reminded, and that pertains to the breakfast, okay? So whatever is on that list, it's kind of the prefix, if you will. It's $8, and Mary Lee Berenge, who's over yonder, is walking around with an envelope, and please attend to that, thanks to Mary Lee. Again, given the time before us and given us this topic, what I will do and attempt to do in a most, dare I say, with the bar represented here in some good ways, I want to do it in the most judicial and effective way possible so that we can really attend to the topic at hand. I want to thank my teammates and subcommittee on this effort with the summit as we serve on the board, but this subcommittee includes Peggy Jackson, Judge Christy McFoy DeRico. You can raise your hand and let you be known as blessed. Oh my gosh, here's the judge. Bob Hyder, Mary Lee Berenge, Jarandi Martinez, over yonder. Jarandi is one of the co-directors of the Community Resource Center. And then also Dr. John Gitlitz. John has been very active with us, present in spirit, but presently he's in Peru. And if you may, as this is being televised by LMTCB, how about a shout out? Hello, John, everybody. Join me. Yeah, thank you very much. Bienvenidos a tu. Let me also note that as we proceed and proceeded as a committee, our work as a team has led us to this wonderful, important, impressive panel. I'm going to say a few short words about them and first name them. To my immediate left and front and center for you, Charlotte Gossett Navarro from the New York Immigration Coalition. To her left, known to us dearingly here in this community, she's one of the staff people in a deputy director role at the Community Resource Center, Janet Rolone. To Janet's left, Professor Vanessa Merton, who is a professor at Pace Law School, director of the Immigration Clinic and Center there. In years gone by, she has been a supervisor to Janet Rolone. We could talk about that in some gracious ways, so there's kind of a sentimental sigh moment. Join with me. We are indeed impressed and glad for that connection as it continues in great ways. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm glad to repeat, as he in fact is repeating, Dr. Robert Shapps. In the history of the summit, I don't know if we've ever had in meetings, monthly meetings, back-to-back panelists, okay? Dr. Shaps makes that distinction. He was here at our last meeting in April and now is back again. And I think he would want to know, we all want to spread the word that there is a vote today, is there not? And we want to have people attend to that in some important ways. Indeed. With no further ado, I've said some short words about each of these dear folks on the panel, and I assure you I could have made it lengthy because they come with serious, impressive credentials as well as extended experience over time in each of their fields, and their fields overlap in some distinct ways, and we'll hear more about that. So with no further ado, if I may, when it comes to their introductions, I would urge you to click on and follow up and learn more about them. In some cases, practically every case of each of these four, they have been in the news in some rather distinct and impressive ways. And so you'll hear about that in what they're about to tell us. But we're going to start with Charlotte. And welcome to you. Some of us have been with you right there on the floor of the Community Resource Center, on the streets in White Plains. You have been in the news and present. Your work with the New York Immigration Coalition has been rather significant. And we're going to lead off with Charlotte. Let me just say some ground rules further. I will do my best to moderate. I don't want to issue any, dare I say, executive order in terms of punctuating. But I will take pains to be effective in terms of noting and giving alerts and even dramatic gestures if need be to come to some conclusion so that we can move into some question and answer with these four. And then we have a segment following some short Q&A with them to hear from the local officials present. Again, as you're just arriving, we have distributed some copies of recent statements from our jurisdictions, if I could put it that way, as well as a very critical letter from the Larchmont Mamaroneck Human Rights Commission, which we presented to the officials. And then following some short comments from the officials, we'll conclude with further question and answer. And by that time, we should be at 11:30. Only kidding, because we're going to try hard for some punctuality. Now, as I mentioned, and with no further ado, we're going to turn to Charlotte. The first question, and you've seen it in some of the flyer and publications committee, forgive me for talking quickly, but to frame these four questions, which each of these four folks will speak to, the question to begin with is the law. What is it now? What has changed with our president's executive actions? If they're still under question, if you go to Seattle, you'll find out and wait for more. And what is the potential impact of this law now and the changes, and why the immigrant population is frightened? So Charlotte, welcome to you.
Thank you. Do we stand or sit? Oh, stand. Okay. Okay. Hello. Thank you for having me here. I'm with the New York Immigration Coalition. We are a statewide coalition of about 200 member organizations across New York State. In here in Westchester County, we have about always fluctuating between 17 and 19 organizations, and some of them are up here on the panel with me, and they're doing and leading the great work here in Westchester County. So I'm going to review with you a little bit about what were the executive actions, what did each one say it was going to do, and what have we actually seen happen as a result? Where has he been successful in his eyes, right? And where have we been successful in stopping some of these things from moving forward? So he put into place, and by he, I'm referring to our current president, put into place 3 different executive actions that were going to impact our immigrant and refugee communities directly. That's who the primary target was within them. I want to preface by saying immigration enforcement did not begin with President Trump. It did not begin with him. Under President Obama, we saw an increase in immigration enforcement. So as much as many of us really were supporters potentially of President Obama and thought, well, he didn't do what Trump was doing, he actually really laid the foundation that Trump is building upon. So he created a lot of these systems and put them in place. So I want to sort of frame it with that before we think that this is all something that just started right now. But when it came to what this new president decided to do, some of his first actions were to follow through on targeting immigrant communities. His first executive order was really targeted on enforcement in the interior. So in areas like here in Westchester County, this would be considered sort of our interior areas, right? His second one was targeting the border and areas along the border. And his third one was targeting people traveling and refugees. And that's the one that probably got the most traction in the news, but I'm going to talk about that one last. So his first one, when it came to thinking about enforcement here internally, was to look at, number one, how does he begin to strengthen the collaboration between immigration enforcement and the police? So under President Obama, there was a program called Secure Communities that was really asking the police, when they had people detained, to keep holding them until ICE could come and get them, right? So if they were an undocumented immigrant or even a visa holder, even a permanent resident, if they fell under particular categories, they were asking law enforcement to hold them until they could come and get them. Then they also had very formal agreements that they could go into with the police called 287G agreements. These were like contracts of sorts that they would sign and get into an agreement to collaborate very formally with police departments. So under President Obama, at one point, those two programs were required. Then there were some lawsuits saying, this is a violation of people's constitutional rights. So then they rolled back that program. They made a voluntary program. Well, under President Obama, under President Trump, he wants to bring those programs back. So even though they were challenged in the courts, he really wants to bring these formal partnerships and collaborations with law enforcement around the country back. So that was his first piece. If you didn't do that, and if you weren't willing to collaborate, his second piece of it was to say, well, we're going to take away money from these so-called sort of sanctuary cities, right? So that was his second threat. If you're not going to collaborate with us, then we're going to take away your money. The other piece that he did, and this is the piece that's particularly frightening, is he took again this enforcement that President Obama was leading of going after particular groups of people, and he expanded it. So although President Obama did increase enforcement, he had a bit of a system to it. So you kind of could know if you were a priority or not, and then prepare. Right? You could talk to an attorney. You could find out, what is my risk level? Am I one of his priorities? He prioritized people who had criminal records, and criminal records is used very broadly. So I want to say it's not just the idea of violent people out there. We're talking about people with some pretty low-level crimes who could be swept up as a priority. So that was under President Obama. We had a system. Our attorneys kind of knew how to advise their clients on it. But then when it comes to what the Attorney General Jeff Sessions and President Trump decided to do, is really to expand that and to create what they are calling a system. But ultimately, if you really look at it, there's no system. So it almost made everybody a priority, or at least put everybody at risk. So an example of this would be, previously, if I come into your home with a warrant because I thought that you met one of my priorities, I would only take you from your home, which in and of itself was horrific, right? What they're doing now under this same idea is, I'm coming into your home looking for you, and I'm taking everyone else in your home, whether they were a priority or not. Right? And so that creates a lot of this chaos that we're seeing. That's just one example of how those priorities have shifted, and there aren't truly priorities anymore. And whereas before they were looking at people with convictions, now even suspicion that you've committed a crime could make you a priority. He also wanted to greatly expand our ICE enforcement. This is the ICE enforcement, are the police officers within the interior who come and pick people up, who enforce immigration law. So that's another piece. His second executive order was on increasing border enforcement. So New York State is a border state. Not everybody remembers that, but we're on the Canadian border. And so anywhere within 100 miles of a border, including water, you are considered a part of the border. And in theory, Border Patrol could come and execute the immigration laws within that area. And they have far fewer sort of restrictions than the ICE agents do. So New York City falls even within that 100-mile border zone. And in theory, Border Patrol could be roaming Times Square. They don't do that. They don't do that in practice, but it does fall within the law. However, on our northern part of our border, in places around Buffalo, around Syracuse, Rochester, they are there. We do see Border Patrol regularly picking up people. And they do a lot of the things that we don't see happen here in Westchester, like picking up people, driving a car and suspecting somebody, racial profiling, pulling somebody over, and then targeting them. They do things like pulling people over. When the police pull people over and they don't speak the language, they call Border Patrol to translate. And Border Patrol comes, and if you can't produce your papers, you are picked up. So we are seeing that happen, and we have many cases where that is happening in New York, in our border. So he wants to increase border enforcement, especially along the southern border, but it will also affect us here in New York. So one is before, if you were in the process of deportation and it wasn't going to happen immediately, you could potentially be released. You weren't always detained. So he wants to see people detained through the entire process, which can take a very long time. And he doesn't want people released in that process. We all know, most famously, he wants a border wall. And then he wants to increase border agents by about 5,000. And so the United States has one of the biggest, or the biggest, sort of border enforcement in the world. We have, I think, over 21,000 agents. He wants to increase that by another 5,000 agents. And then in addition to that, he is trying, let me open my notes so I don't forget the little pieces. This phone keeps shutting off on me. In addition to that, he wants to build additional detention centers. So under President Obama, we saw, and the Department of Justice was beginning to shut down some of their contracts with private prisons, particularly for people detained through the criminal justice system. They hadn't yet applied that to the immigration system. However, under Attorney General Jeff Sessions leading the Department of Justice, they have decided to contract again and increase their contracts with private prisons, and they want to open more detention facilities across the border. He also wants to, and maybe Vanessa can speak more to this, expand the use of expedited removals. So when someone is apprehended within that 100-mile border zone previously, and they couldn't show that they'd been here, I think it was more than 2 weeks, they could quickly, without even seeing a judge, they could be deported out. He wants to expand that to say, one, that it wouldn't even be within the 100-mile zone, and also to expand it that if you can't prove that you've been here more than 2 years after they pick you up, that they can immediately deport you.
I can tell you, from being in Delhi, expedited removal is now being used now.
So it's already being implemented, that piece of it. And then his last executive order that got a lot of news is his travel ban, which we very much feel is just a euphemism for a Muslim travel ban, specifically choosing Muslim majority nations to ban from travel here. The first one was sort of rejected in the courts, so he drafted a new one that was equally bad. That new one was banning the issuance of new visas from 6 countries instead of the original 7 countries, and a 120-day suspension of the entire refugee program. So some of the things to note about that, when the first one went into place, we expected there to be months before its rollout, but it began, they asked Border Patrol to implement it the next day. So there were people coming into the country who were in the air and landing and not able to enter because Border Patrol began to detain them. And Border Patrol didn't know, the Customs and Border Patrol in the airport didn't even know what to do. They hadn't been given instructions except not to let people in. So that was blocked in the courts. Again, the second one came out, which isn't very different from that. That one has also been blocked in the courts. So first we saw in Virginia, in the 4th District Court, that they blocked the piece of that was not going to allow new visas from particular countries. Then in the 9th District Court, they blocked the piece that the entire executive order. So no part of it can go into implementation yet. So they put an injunction on it, which means they need to hear the case. They've started hearing the cases actually this week, and we should probably know within a month what the first decision is at this level of the process. Note, though, that no matter what the result is, whether our side comes out successful on it or the president's side comes out successful, there'll be an appeal from whoever loses, and likely this will carry itself all the way up to the Supreme Court. What we need to watch is, depending on how the different courts decide, if they do decide in favor of Trump, will they lift the injunction? Or will they keep the injunction during the appeal process? Meaning, will they allow the program to go forward through the appeal process, so he'll be able to allow sort of this block to the refugee program and this block to new visas? Or will the judge say, no, you have to keep a pause on this program? We suspect they'll probably say keep a pause on this program, but we're not sure. So how successful has he been in a lot of these things? We could say, one, a lot of them require money. And in his budget that he put out most recently, he was denied most of the money he asked for. So he was denied any money to build a border wall in this first budget. So that's one success. He also was denied money to expand the immigration force. He was given funds to increase it to the levels that they were supposed to be at previously under President Obama, and they were still had sort of a gap there. But he had asked for additional funds to do all of this hiring that he wanted. That was not allowed either. He was given funds to add electronic enforcement to the border, so perhaps not a wall, but a lot more surveillance, as well as he was given additional money to hire new immigration judges, which under a different president might have been good because there's such a backlog in all of the immigration system, but really he wants to be using this to deport more people, not to help more people get processed.
Every single one that's been hired has previously been a government attorney.
So everyone who was hired was previously a government attorney, as Vanessa is saying here. So in many of these things, and even with, he also attempted to defund the refugee program entirely in his budget. However, it was, the funding was reinstated at the level that it had been in the previous year, so he was not successful there. Another sort of little known piece that he's trying to do is this idea of extreme vetting of refugees and other travelers from particular countries. So he has said that the extreme vetting that currently exists, and it is very extreme, is not sufficient under his eyes, and wants to add to that. So he's submitted for a rule change to the government that's going to ask for additional requirements for travelers from particular countries and all refugees. So those extra things are going to be impossible for some people, particularly refugees. So for example, one of the pieces of the rule change that he's requesting is that you be able to show 10 years of travel, of your entire travel history, evidence and documentation, as well as who paid for it, as well as 5 years of your social media history. So being able to show every handle, right, or every name you've used on social media, so that they could potentially vet you through social media. And if you're like me, you probably carelessly like things on social media all the time without ever thinking someone's going to come comb through it and judge your worthiness to come into this country based on what you may have liked or not.
Unless you're a terrorist.
Okay, great, thank you. Unless it.
Terrorists, you're going to be very careful.
Yeah, exactly. They're probably the most careful. So I'm going to wrap it up with that so we can move on to our next speaker. I'll take questions at the end.
Thank you, Charlotte. And take a deep breath. We're moving well. Just in terms of information stuff, if you can't get Charlotte at the New York Immigration Coalition, let me just run this by. Our friend John Gitlitz recommends immigrationpolicy.org in terms of a source insofar as update. And also, speaking of social media, many folks will be turning to LMC TV. We are at a historic point in time, May 16th. We're taping this. It will be aired upcoming. And mark that date in terms of what we're hearing right now in terms of what's happened with it, in terms of status of steps and procedure. We got something of a tutorial going on. We wanted to move from the state of the laws that exist now with notes as you've heard them from Charlotte, and now move to Janet Rallone. We could do that. We could do that, and it sounds like, I mean, she's been your supervisor, and there's a history here. So let's move with that, and turn now, Vanessa, to have you follow. I mean.
Okay, I'm not going to talk about that at all.
Yeah, because we wanted really to, with regard to Vanessa, and here's the synchronicity to this, and that is to say, we're going to hear from Janet. It might be now, it might be a little bit after Vanessa, insofar as what's happening here with on the local level in terms of help with those who are vulnerable of immigration status, as well as critical steps insofar as informing people of their rights and helping with that in terms of anticipation of any actions further. So hold that thought. Let's turn to Vanessa now. Come around front. Well, you don't have to do that, Vanessa. I'll just hand this to you.
I don't want
Other people, sure.
Thank you.
Great.
Let me just grab this pile of paper. Yes, hi, Vanessa Merton, and I just want to say that what I do now is run a free legal clinic that is staffed by law students, works with immigrants in any capacity of legal need at Pace Law School, now the Haub School of Law in White Plains. So what I did, we're talking about the most complex, convoluted, counterintuitive, insane body of law there is or ever has been in American history, okay? So in 10 minutes, I didn't really feel I could do it justice. What I did is what lawyers do. I brought about 20 pounds of paper, which is all spread out there. Any topic you want that's remotely related to any of this, it's covered. So if you want to pick it up on your way out, feel free. If not, that's fine too. One of the items there in bright orange is a description of our clinic and the work that we do, in case you're interested in that, or it also has my contact information on it. In addition, I'll mention one of the many other pieces of paper because we had a reference to keeping up. What I put together is a pretty comprehensive list of resources for teaching yourself about immigration law from reliable and up-to-date and competent sources. And that looks like this, and that's back there too. You can pick it up if you wish. Because it is it is an area of enormous confusion and misinformation. Most people really have no idea what the immigration system is like. I also put out there for you a really cute chart. It's a chart, it looks like this, and it has a million boxes on it because it represents a tiny one portion of the immigration system, and you will look at it and you will start screaming and say, no human could navigate this system, let alone someone with no resources and limited English proficiency, etc., not familiar with any legal system perhaps. It's an impossible task, which it has not stopped, however. For example, recently, a number of immigration judges were found to have posted and made comments to the effect that they thought it was okay that the 3-year-olds that they are sitting in judgment on at the border with Mexico don't have counsel or anyone else with them in the proceeding, because these 3-year-olds apparently, according to these judges, do a pretty good job. And the response to that was hundreds of immigration lawyers all over the country happen to have 3-year-olds put up on YouTube. They put their 3-year-olds through the proceeding as it would be. It was very interesting. It was very creative, but it didn't create a lot of confidence in the system that we're dealing with. So the piece I'm going to try to address is this issue of, on the one hand, we have this very powerful response to Trump's actions, primarily Trump's actions, and it's taking the form of a movement that some call sanctuary. Okay, and I want to spend a couple of sentences at least. I'm going to be making here, remember, broad-based assertions, no evidence, no real arguments. They're all in my paper, but there's no time for me to give them to you this way. So I'm just going to say that I have concerns about the approach being, let's have sanctuary. And I would submit to you that that is not going to help the immigrant community with what they really need. And what they really need to try to survive this system, to try to extract the few morsels of due process that are available in this system that is trying to destroy their families and their livelihoods And these are people, by the way, not people who just came over the border last week, but people who have been here for decades, who have their entire families here. Because while the phrase illegals is thrown around very loosely, the reality is that a great majority of people who are subjected to deportation, if they had competent ethical counsel, would have a very good shot at regularizing their status and being allowed to remain in the United States, or possibly having to leave the United States and go through consular processing outside the United States but return. However, that option is not going to be available to them in this system if they don't have lawyers. So what I'm all about is making the plea that what immigrants need, if we can't get a right to counsel in this most intricate and most bizarre and challenging and prolonged system, and by the way, more and more and more immigrants who are going through the system are being locked up, which makes it even more difficult. If we can't quite get to the point where we're going to be able to get the government to provide counsel, and if I have time, I'll say a word or two about the New York State initiative in this regard. But what I'm going to call upon people to think about is maybe instead of putting so much emphasis on trying to create a sanctuary situation, what's called sanctuary, and which I would argue is kind of deceptive to the immigrant community, because you ask me what rights do immigrants have? Well, one right, there's nothing. There is no way that the county, the town, the village, the city can stop ICE from taking into custody an immigrant if ICE has a basis for doing that. You can't stop that. What you could do in your localities and in your churches or places of worship or in your community groups, community organizations, is try to raise money, find, and I have to say a word about this, find competent, decent immigration, experienced, knowledgeable immigration counsel, and make sure that immigrants who want to try to assert some rights, to try to maintain some rights, have a shot, just a shot, an opportunity with that assistance. That's why I started this clinic 12 years ago. I was doing a lot of other work. I never wanted to go near it. Most sane lawyers don't want to go near immigration for any. But I was running a domestic violence program as a prosecutor with the Manhattan DA's office, and every single one of the victims, of the DV victims we were seeing, were immigrant women, and they were all had been fleeced and taken to the cleaners by the incredibly slimy, I have no words, immigration bar. And I have a lot of information about this, including a long piece that I've written, which I don't think is that good, but it's what I couldn't find anything else. This is my piece to give to immigrants in various languages, which is information about trying to obtain representation in immigration matters, because there's a lot to say. The Attorney General, I also have materials from the Attorney General of the state of New York, who has a very active program trying to prosecute, trying to go after these bad, awful lawyers. Alas, the disciplinary committees of the profession do not do a very good job in this regard and are too easily intimidated by slick lawyers who tell them they don't know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to immigration, which is true, and therefore can't understand the careful judgments that they were using when they completely screwed over their clients. So that is an important component of this. A lot of people again, lose their rights, lose their status, and are deported, not for anything that they did, but because they have one of these incredibly lousy, crummy, greedy, disgusting lawyers. Or even non-lawyers. There are a lot of non-lawyers who do the same thing. We're done?
For now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Merton. I mean, stay tuned for more, not to mention the handouts, the aforementioned handouts. Professor Merton was cited by the, if I have this right with the organization, the American Association of Immigration Lawyers for excellence in teaching in some recent years. Indeed, applause, give it up. And that teaching, obviously, here are students in the classroom with you, but also an array and a growing constellation of volunteers, some of whom have come to some of the events at the Community Resource Center, where some significant steps have been underway in terms of help for and with folks who are immigrant and vulnerable, as well as more than just tutorial on know your rights for all those folks, not to mention just those folks, but also local law enforcement and elected officials have been present in all that. All of this is a bit of a step and a segue to our next speaker, who is Deputy Director of the Community Resource Center, and she is Janet Rolón. We want to have Janet talk. Bienvenidos a usted. Talk a bit about what is happening in terms of help and care, as well as further in education.
Muchas gracias, Bill. Thank you very much, Bill. I love when he speaks Spanish to me. So, good morning, everyone. As Bill said, my name is Janet Rolón. I am the Deputy Executive Director of the Community Resource Center, and I also oversee the Case Management Department at the CRC. It's really an honor to me to share this panel with my mentor, for so many years, Vanessa Merton, who actually inspired me to get into the immigration field, and I'm still passionate about that, even though, everything looks great now. And also, with Charo and Dr. Schaaf, because, Charo is a great advocate and she's a great supporter from the New York Immigration Coalition. And Dr. Schaaf has welcomed the CRC, especially at the PATH committee, to talk to their counselors, their teachers about what's going on with immigration. And I'm here just to share, what we're doing at the CRC, especially due to the recent executive orders and the last year's presidential elections. So since November of last year, a collective panic swept the immigrant community. We heard of rumors of ICE activities in Westchester County. We heard people, being detained and deported, and we also, saw videos of ICE agents detaining people on the streets, and those rapidly spread to social media that increased, the anxiety, especially here in Mamaroneck, because most of those rumors we found out eventually that weren't true. And actually myself and Randy and Gail Vidales, our co-executive directors, called local police stations or other agencies, partner agencies, to make sure whether those rumors were true or not. Because we wanted to contain that anxiety, but we also needed sometimes to create some sort of a plan to mitigate this issue. So the CRC, after the presidential elections and the executive orders, hosted a series of forums, community forums, in which we were informing our community, actually, almost 500 community members, about their rights, about how to plan in case of deportation, and to consult or to have a consultation with an immigration attorney, just in case they are eligible for any immigration relief. So at these forums, we emphasize the message that ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, cannot just show up to your home and break into your house or get in without your permission. Actually, if ICE shows up, at your home, ICE must show a judicial warrant signed by a judge naming the person they want to detain. They cannot just break in or just enter your home without your permission. When we hosted our community forums, we invited our elected officials and our mayor and members of the police department, and also board of trustees showed up to emphasize the same message, and even went further, saying that to our community members, that if ICE shows up to your home, just call us. We will make sure that those are ICE agents or not, and we will tell them to provide the legal document to go into your house if they have to. So that was really something that assured our community that, at least in Mamaroneck, our community is safe and protected, and they can resort to local police enforcement in case they don't know whether ICE is at their door. So that was really powerful for us to hear that. So, and we also inform our community at these community forums the importance of planning, because most of undocumented immigrants have U.S.-born children. And those U.S.-born children, in case their parents are detained, they might end up in foster care if they don't have somebody, another adult, who can temporarily provide custody of those children. So we had to inform our parents, our community members about this risk. And also, you know, the families need to plan around, especially the ones who have DACA recipients' children. I don't know if you are informed about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And I'm not an expert on that, but Vanessa Merton, of course, it is, so you can ask her questions later when I finish. But, you know, these families needed to plan around all those situations, and most of them, because it was recommended now that, you know, any immigration status, for example, is not safe anymore, that they have to pick a designated person with a U.S. citizen, or is a U.S. citizen, or who holds a permanent resident status. Because those are the two kind of status that are much more secure in this country. And also that if they don't have, for example, somebody else, that they can resort to a friend or to a neighbor that they have, you know, trust, and that they could actually play this role. So it was really difficult for families to understand this concept of choosing somebody, asking first for their immigration status to make sure that they are leaving their kids with someone who at least is not gonna get deported. So for us, for the CRC, it was very hard to create a plan to meet this need, which was huge back in, I think at the end of February, actually, we started with the whole planning. We partnered with PACE Women Justice Center because they are partnered with us, especially on domestic violence victims. They know family law, and they help us. They guide us to, and they guide also families, and they provide trainings to volunteers to help these families to fill out parental designation forms and power of attorneys. So, and explaining this process to the families, we had to break it into two steps. One, having a workshop with families only and explaining what these forms, you know, what parental designation forms are, for example, when you can use a power of attorney. They had questions about, am I, you know, surrendering my rights over my kids now? Is this person is going to reunite me with my kid eventually if I get deported? So there were serious questions that we needed, you know, legal experts to be at those workshops. And I'm very thankful to the attorneys who showed up to volunteer their time and their expertise that actually was most needed at the time, especially when we run these clinics, to assist these families and especially provide them with answers and some sort of relief that if they get deported, you know, eventually they can be reunited with their kids. So it was really, we have hosted so far 2 clinics, one in March and the other one in April. And we have assisted, you know, at least 60 families on their parental designation forms. But there's one big challenge, and you can let me know when I'm okay. Yeah, okay. There's one big challenge that I really want to mention. Even though these parents know what to do in terms of emergency preparedness, they still don't have that designated person. They still don't have their plan in place because of, you know, the limited options that they have, especially now that they have to, you know, maybe look for a friend or even a family member who doesn't live in the state, you know, and don't have any connection with their children that they're considering to play this role. I just wanted to, you know, say this out there. I'm sorry, this is kind of like sad, but we're still, you know, helping this family. We're still running these clinics, and I hope that you can support us doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. I think you may have noticed it wasn't lost on me, but Janet invited me to interrupt her. And we have it on tape here too. I think this is a wonderful step and segue into turning to Dr. Schaps. We actually had a preview of this question, Dr. Schaps, at the last meeting of the summit back in April. Welcome back again, and maybe we'll see you at the June meeting as well. But in the meantime, I mean, this particular question, I mean, here we have students in the fullness of our schools here in this district, and elements of, yes, these procedures, law, also anticipation, and elements of that risk, certainly anticipation.
So, good morning. Thank you. And I want to just provide some practical responses to much which has been discussed and presented this morning. First and foremost, schools are about children, and we know since the election, from an emotional perspective, thinking about educating children each day who are coming into schools whose future is uncertain or at risk, it makes it more difficult. So there's a sensitivity to ensuring that we know our children, that we know what they're experiencing in the families, and staying connected. But I want to talk about 4 practical issues with immigration as it relates to the school. The first, the Plyler case, Plyler versus Doe, which went to the Supreme Court in 1982, ensures this idea of equal access, that all undocumented aliens or any child has access to the public schools. And so there's no question in our mind that is the guiding principle in terms of the highest court in the land. The second issue is that we know from a practical perspective that how our students and families are interacting with government officials is something that spills into the school. So, for example, we need to, under federal law, protect student records. So there cannot be, under FERPA, any request by government officials to release information that would provide any hint of their status or that information. And so we take that seriously and really are protective under FERPA, which is our guiding principle in terms of student records. The other question that's come up often is this idea of ICE access to schools. And early on, we sought clarification from legal counsel, and certainly it's illogical in some respects that schools are considered non-public venues, even though we're a public school. To that extent, they are not open to the general public, and so short of a warrant, any law officer is really prohibited from entering schools to speak to a student or to interview students about their family member situation. And we certainly take that seriously and protect that right as well. I think finally, the last thing that's important to us is this idea of care and custody of children. And as Janet mentioned, we do know that there are precarious family situations and circumstances. And so as much as we try to provide credible information, this idea of advanced planning and critically identifying adults or community members that can support children are important, because we have a number of students whose families' fate are uncertain relative to immigration status. And so in a moment's notice, when we have to each reach out to a particular family member or guardian, we need to know through our own system who is that individual. And it makes for some unease and uncertainty, because could you imagine at the end of a school day when an elementary student is still in our school because the adult did not come to pick them up, and we are uncertain as to what to do with this child. So we have by law this care and custody responsibility, and we have to deal with that on an individual basis, but we are certainly versed and prepared for contingency plans, and having the opportunity to work with community organizations are critical, because as much as we can insist that parents find somebody, we know that when there is a situation that they're not expecting, it's difficult to scramble and deal with that, and we're left dealing with a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and having to be able to care for them. So that's how we're managing this. The last thing I'll say is credible information is critically important. And as a general community, I'm very impressed by the sharing of information to make sure that our immigrant families know what is important and what is credible, and to help guide them in these uncertain times. So
we are at that point, as promised, for a bit of Q&A. And let me just suggest that we could handle perhaps 3 to 4 questions in this zone. Let me implore you to be to the point in your question, no speechification. I'm glad to welcome the first question. Where might it be and where might it come from? While you're thinking, let me just point out a couple of pieces of data, thinking as you are. We have perhaps 13% of our population who are foreign born and may be categorized as immigrant, as a U.S. population. Westchester County, 27%. And do you have what does that equal in terms of raw number? 13% of the national population, which is 42 million. 11 million noted, and we heard this on the campaign trail, as undocumented. Here in Westchester County, we're talking 27% of the population, which, do the math, around 250,000. There you go. I see a hand in the back, please.
And there are 6 organizations that provide free legal assistance.
6 organizations provide free legal assistance to immigrants, and I don't know if we want to hear that 6. Okay, go to Dr. Merton for just that. You're going to need to speak up, and I can run to like Phil Donahue.
I'm loud.
Okay.
I got a big voice.
All right.
Part of that dirty immigration bar, but I know the panelists up there. My name is Sarah Levin. I wanted to point out to people in this room, one of the things that Vanessa said really appealed to me very strongly is about not just being a sanctuary city, but taking personal responsibility. I do employment immigration law, and I have a feeling that just about everyone in this room employs an immigrant. If you have not looked into whether or not you have a legal means of correcting the status of the person in your employment, then you aren't correct in your duties. There are a lot of immigration, people go, oh, the immigrants should find counsel. They can't sponsor themselves. In a lot of circumstances, they need their employer to sponsor them. So if you employ people in your world, in your house, cleaning your yard, you should find out if there is a way for you to sponsor them. It's actually the fastest it's ever been to get employment-based green cards for people because the system is so dysfunctional right now. And you might be sitting there on, maybe you can't do the woman that's been cleaning your house for 15 years, but you can do her 18-year-old daughter. So I wish you would all explore those options for yourselves and see if you can fix things.
Okay, I just want to thank you for that. As a moderator, I feel really vulnerable. I asked for a question. I got a wonderful statement, a very good statement, so please know that, and thank you. Among the 6 legal clinics, I mean, perhaps at least one of them can deal with this critical question. It's come up in our planning group, namely, what about employers? What about employees? Okay, no. In terms of
most employers can afford to pay. We have income and I'm talking about organizations, community organizations that provide free legal services to people who are poor. And that's people. But most employers, we generally do not handle employment-based cases because most potential employers can afford, as part of the cost of doing business, to pay Sarah, who knows how to do it, to handle this. You just have to be, I'll reiterate, very, very careful who you pick, because employers get rooked over almost as often as immigrants themselves.
There we go. A legal term, rooked over.
That's not the term I usually use.
We have a great feeling that there's wonderfully colorful terminology. Let me just suggest that in terms of information on this point, obviously not the free legal clinics, but where can people turn for information with regard to regs and stipulations with employers?
It would be very difficult for you to figure it out yourself.
Okay.
But there are, if you look on Nextdoor, I'm not the only business immigration lawyer in town. I've seen them listed in Nextdoor. Pay the couple $100 and have a consult. If you're somebody that comes into my clinic, I don't charge anyone that's local.
There's a list.
There you
There
go.
are all the websites, and it's got a bunch of attorneys and whatever.
And we can make copies and post it too. Thank you very much. We're getting into crowdsource here in a rather dynamic way. Sarah, we're sorry you're not on the panel, but you're a candidate to be sure. Another question, please. Let me turn over here. Lynn Reiskop.
Thank you. I have a question. Thank you. This was wonderful. Such agents? Have there been ICE agents and people in our communities? And what actually is the experience been? Is it that goes beyond the anxiety?
Let me repeat the question. Have there been ICE agents in our communities, and what have been the procedure and steps along with that, please?
Yes, definitely. Within this last month, there have been people who have been detained by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement here in Westchester County. Some people have been picked up from their homes, which is the most common way that people get picked up. However, we also know of someone who was driving, and after dropping off his daughter at daycare, he was picked up on the road as ICE followed him. And so it's definitely happening here in Westchester County. And again, they'll claim and often claim that it's people who have criminal records, but in the example of the person who was picked up, it was a many years ago DUI that he had, and was on probation for that to prove that he would not do that again, and as a result of that is now at risk of being separated from all of his children for something from many years ago. And we all make mistakes, but the immigration system doesn't forgive you, so that's a problem.
Oh, I thought you were going to mention. Okay.
Oh, Mamaroneck? No, we haven't confirmed any rumors in Mamaroneck. We have heard from community members saying they have seen ICE agents wearing, those jackets with the ICE, were on the back. But we cannot confirm whether those are ICE raids or ICE being in town. But I think you wanted me to mention something that happened several years ago, that we have really, ICE raids in Westchester County. And as most of us have mentioned, that this is not something new. This has been going on, but now is with full force. Now we know a change in policy. Now we know a change in terms of how immigrants are being treated, not only by ICE officers, but also community members, employers threatening, calling ICE on them if they don't, work overtime, if they don't, work without pay. So those are the things that now we're seeing. And also we have seen, we try to inform our community about fraud, that they have to be careful who they consult with, that notary publics are not attorneys, and that we also, look for second opinions, because sometimes attorneys, they just want, individuals to file for anything, even, the famous 10-year law, which doesn't exist. So, our community is very vulnerable right now in so many aspects, but one of them is they're being preyed, victims of these unscrupulous, I don't want to say attorneys, because, we really, trust them, but attorneys who just, do anything, what they can just to get money in exchange. That's sure. Yeah, sure.
What is going on here? Okay. And just one more aspect. I'm going to reverse what I said a moment ago. We have consulted with some very small employers, a bodega in White Plains. There are employers who are being threatened by people who may or may not be related to gang. It's not clear that they will be reported now to ICE for employing undocumented people or people without employment authorization. And that's a whole nother aspect which has begun to manifest itself. Two things that you should know if you don't know, factoids of importance. One is immigrants are the only people in this country who have no protection under the ex post facto doctrine. That is to say, if the law changes in a way that makes it bad for the immigrants, for most of us, if the law changes and about something we did a long time ago, too bad. The government can't do anything to us because of the doctrine of ex post facto. For immigrants, that does not apply. And when the law changes for the worse for immigrants, it affects them. And no matter what careful plans, no matter what good advice they got at the time, it all doesn't matter now because they are at the mercy of the changed law. Second interesting factoid, when an immigrant is taken into custody, that immigrant can be sent by ICE anywhere in the country, up to and including Alaska and I believe Guam, actually. And if That means it doesn't matter, your witnesses, your documents, your family, and your lawyer may all be somewhere else, but you have to fight it out alone in godforsaken Oakdale, Louisiana, 6 hours from nowhere and hell on earth.
In the case of deportation, or detention. I must say, given this last couple moments, given the time as well, I see fingers pointing at me, but I'm going to point a couple fingers, namely to our elected officials. I know, and I'm going to, dare I say, trump that. I quite frankly, given our concern and promise at the top of the agenda here, we wanted to point to and also call for a word from our elected officials in terms of provisions in place, steps that have been taken, words issued, with regard to protocol and procedure in our local locale governments. And so one of those, and two are here, Town of Mamaroneck as well as Village of Mamaroneck. Let me turn to Nancy first, and then also, and Village of Larchmont as well. Lorraine is here, and I realize there's some stuff in just about to happen there, but Nancy, let's turn to you, and we can get the microphone to you as well. And while Nancy's coming to the mic, there have been a couple documents circulated from the Town of Mamaroneck as well as the Committee for Human Rights, and one of those issued by Nancy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy Seligson, Supervisor of the Town of Mamaroneck. And after the January 30th executive order that was issued, I did go into town the next day and say, we have to say something in our community. And my town board wholly agreed with me. So we did issue a statement that is on your tables in front of you. And I'm happy to say that the police chief from the Town of Mamaroneck, Rich Rivera, took it upon himself to create a statement for the police officers regarding standing operating procedures in response to the statement that I made. And basically this statement from the Town of Mamaroneck Town Council is that we do not enforce immigration law, never have, currently don't, and don't ever intend to. That we are a community policing agency and we need to work with the community, that if someone did something terrible in our community, we would want to pursue them regardless of their immigration status, but that we would never ask anyone for their immigration status, and people should feel very comfortable with that. Our police chief and I and the town administrator have met with several groups to talk to them about what that means in terms of actual action on the ground should something happen. And it's very clear that unless there is a judicial warrant for someone, that our police force and the town would take no action regarding anyone's immigration status. You're welcome to call me with any questions or follow-up. We're happy to meet with people. We know that the community is very concerned about this issue, and I think it's great to have everyone here.
Norman Rosenblum, Village of Mamaroneck Mayor. Let me say that as Norman comes forward, the Committee on Human Rights has met with both Norman and Nancy with regard to this. That committee is represented with Malcolm, Village Trustee in Larchmont, and so stay tuned for just a word from Larchmont, but first Norman.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would note that, as Professor Merton noted, actually when I first came into office, this is an ongoing problem. It's obviously highlighted with the most recent election and Trump's administration. I would note, as Nancy noted, there is an official policy of the Village of Mamaroneck, which is the same as the Town of Mamaroneck, probably almost most communities in Westchester County, because quite honestly, it's a cut and paste. The reality is that perception becomes reality. There was perception immediately in the Village of Mamaroneck, and people were afraid. Both Chief Leahy and myself and several officers attended the Community Resource Center to sort of allay those fears. I would note that we are not an agent of the federal government. Nothing has changed in the past 10 years. Nothing will change. The only time that someone would become involved is not necessarily because they're undocumented or an immigrant. It's because they are in the system, and if you are pulled over, the requirements of this policy are You are not to ask anything about immigration status whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the Village of Mamaroneck, along with other municipalities, have championed such concepts as those that are undocumented have the authority and support, at least I don't know if it happened yet in New York State, but to be able to get a driver's license. There's a pragmatic approach to this. If you're driving in a car and you're in an accident, you certainly want someone who is licensed and insured and so on. This is just small aspects of what happens in the Village of Mamaroneck, and any place else for that matter. But nothing has changed. If you are documented or undocumented in the Village of Mamaroneck, you are treated on a level playing field. Only those that are in a criminal system have to worry, and that's what the Village of Mamaroneck will continue to do. I would note, without going on, I believe, as noted before, education is extremely important. And this is not only to the people out here, but the people that will be watching this on LMC TV. This comes not from myself, I am not an attorney, but it does come from Pollock, Isaac, and DiCiaccio, which I forward this to the Community Resource Center. It is very important. Please note the following. Reported raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials have created a sense of panic among the documented and undocumented immigrants in various sanctuary cities, including New York, San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. If ICE detains you, a friend or a family member, or if agents show up at your home, you should know the following rights. 6 very important points. 1. ICE agents may detain a person in a public setting with an administrative warrant. However, an administrative warrant does not give ICE agents permission to enter your home. ICE agents may only enter your home if you give them permission to come in. You are not obligated to answer or open the door. Still, you should be aware if you don't open, ICE will likely return. If ICE agents show up at your residence, we highly recommend you contact us, meaning the Community Resource Center. 2, you should speak with a family member and friend in an emergency place. Your family member or friend should have access to financial resources, personal documents, and assist with, and very quickly, you have a right to remain silent. Calmly inform ICE agents that you wish to exercise this right. You are not obligated to speak or answer questions. If you decide to speak, remember anything you can say will be used against you, and do not lie to ICE agents. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you. Let me, just move quickly. We mentioned Larchmont. Mayor Walsh is here, over yonder, and then she's left, and Village Trustee.
She had to leave. She was here earlier. She had to leave for previous commitments.
Okay. Do you want to say a word on Village of Larchmont with regard to steps, issuances, the like? Thank you. And we're at the point of closing.
Yeah. Good morning. As many of you probably know or have seen, at least a couple of months ago, Mayor Walsh posted on the Larchmont Village website a brief statement of policy or philosophy. It wasn't that detailed, but she felt that it was important to get that out quickly. In the meantime, the mayor and the rest of the board has been working on clarifying exactly what the details of the village's policy will be. A lot of it will be in sync with what you heard from Nancy and Norm. Last night at a Board of Trustees work session, we had a lengthy meeting with Chief John Polway, our Chief of Police, to go into extreme detail on what their current practices are and what we can expect from the police and what their responsibilities are. As a result of all of this, very, very soon, just like the town of Mamaroneck and the village of Mamaroneck have done, the village of Larchmont will be distributing a similar detailed policy. Thanks so much.
Whoa. This is a dramatic conclusion. We are at that point of conclusion. I just want to turn to the panel. If there's any closing comments, we are punctual with our beginning and even our conclusion. So anyway, Charlotte?
I did just want to offer sort of a call to action of what can you do. So I know the town here locally has done a lot already. But when we think about how who immigrants are interacting with, they're also interacting with the county, they're also interacting with the state, and of course with the federal government. So there's a lot we can do, and in particular, making sure your legislators hear from you that this is important to you, particularly to you as voters. So if you can do, when you hear that there is an opportunity to pass legislation to provide additional funding support to our nonprofit legal service providers, to our nonprofit community-based organizations, when you hear about policies at the state level, such as right now the driver's license bill that was mentioned, that we're trying to pass at the state level, they're trying to move more funding to legal providers at the state level, make a phone call to your legislator. And here in Mamaroneck and in this area, we have some pretty sympathetic legislators, but in order to make sure that they know they should champion an issue, that they shouldn't just wait till it gets in front of them to vote for it, but really fight for it, they need to hear from you. So I do ask that you make phone calls to your state representatives, to your federal representatives, and including your Westchester County legislators, and let them know that you want to see from them championing different bills and initiatives that are really going to support all members of your community.
I want to thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Charlotte and Janet and Vanessa and Dr. Schaps. Vanessa, I see your hand. This is what you might do with a student at the end of the class.
No, I just wanted to, I mentioned it that this area is rife with misinformation. But I want to just, I have to emphasize that there is no other area of public policy which is based on such falsehoods, such myths, such incredible perverse notions and ideas. There's just, most people in this country have no clue. And I know, because before I got into this field, I was one of those people. I just want to commend to you, I left an article out there. It's from the ABA Journal. It's called Chasing the Dream. Pick it up on your way out if you don't pick up anything else. It goes through about 10 of the major myths about immigrants. And without understanding that context, it's very hard to be intelligently critical of any particular proposal or proposition. Thank you very much.
Yes, only one thing, please. Support your community-based organizations. Your, time, it's important, and any type of support you can give us, please. These are our pamphlets. You can get one of us, get to know what we do in our community and all our efforts to mitigate this issue. And also this flyer, in case you decide what to do, this is very important. We'll give this flyer to our community members. Thank you.
There's a murmur, people are on their feet, there's a rustle. Let me ask for your attention for the next 30 seconds. A very important announcement from our Summit President.
I just want to say that we're very honored to be the recipient of the LMCTV Community Award. Next Wednesday night is at 7:30. Sabrina, where is it? It's at the VFW? Yeah. At, I think, 7:30, if anybody wants to come and share our joy in receiving this award, we certainly welcome you, and we want to thank you for coming today, and we're delighted that we are going to receive this award. Yes, we did. And vote. Don't forget to vote again for the school budget.
So, on the move, we want to thank all of our panel, Dr. Schaps, Vanessa, Janet, Charlotte. Also, I'm told that there's some teachers who have come with Dr. Schaps. I don't know where their students are, but nonetheless, we want to thank you for your presence. Thank you one and all for your attendance. Look and listen for the summit notes in terms of this particular moment, and get ready for next meeting, which will feature Jeff Megan. That will be in June. Thank you, everyone. Have a great morning.